I would like to start by thanking the amazing team at Lallemand for giving me this opportunity to talk to you about something that I'm passionate about, the welfare of dogs and horses. I'll start off with a very brief explanation of why horses and dogs go so well together in terms of their emotionality, and then I will go on to the importance of mood state and why and how it is critically important in animal welfare. This then brings me on neatly to the specifics, the nuts and bolts, if you like, of emotional states in dogs and horses and how they work. Then finally, I will talk about how emotional states and mood states go wrong and what we can do as owners or professionals working with dogs and horses. I will also mention how we can recognize and treat some of the common behavior problems. For me, as a veterinarian, treating both horses and dogs, from a clinical and medical point of view, they are very different species. But for me, as a behaviorist, horses and dogs are remarkably similar, both behaviorally and emotionally. And I say this for a number of important reasons. In evolutionary terms, they're both domesticated species. And this means that both horses and dogs are highly social species. They both live in groups, and importantly, they enjoy living with and around humans. Of all the domesticated animals, for example, sheep, cattle, goats, chickens, pigs, and so on, both horses and dogs have also become companion animal pets for us humans. So dogs and horses are much more than simple domesticated animals, which we humans use for work and for sources of food. Dogs and horses have become our friends. They have become an important part of our families. So while horses and dogs represent opposite ends of the size scale, horses being well over 10 times heavier than the average dog, the size of their brains is remarkably similar, both in size and in architecture. Dogs on average have between 1 to 2 billion neurons in their brains, while horses have on average around 1 billion. By comparison, we humans have a massive 86 billion neurons in our brains. So I'm going to be talking about both dogs and horses, and specifically about their complex emotional lives. So let's start with this. On the left-hand side of this slide, what you see is a very simple two-dimensional chart where I can effectively plot pretty much every possible emotional state or feeling that we could experience. The x-axis on this chart represents strength of feeling, running from very good feelings on the right-hand side, then across to very bad feelings on the left. The y-axis represents the magnitude of all these feelings in terms of their arousal level. And here I've plotted the four extremes of possible emotional states. Imagine you've just won the lottery. In an instant, you're a millionaire. How would you feel? You would be hugely excited and you'd be dancing and jumping around. Your arousal level would be very high, and I've shown this on the top right of the chart. On the bottom right of the chart, it's now late that night. You're still feeling hugely positive about all the money you've won, but you're tired and your arousal level is low and you're ready to go to sleep. On the top left of the chart, you're on holiday in some tropical place and you're being chased by a tiger. How would you feel then? You'd be terrified. Terror is a combination of extreme fear and extreme arousal level. You'd be running away screaming. Finally, on the bottom left of the chart, the emotional state is again very negative, but also the arousal level is very low. And this is characteristic of deep depression and so-called learned helplessness, a state where we simply give up because we believe we have absolutely no control over the unfortunate circumstances we find ourselves in. Here's something you can try at home. You can even try this with your dogs or horses if you like. Let's say that you decide to check out or to measure your own emotional well-being by self-assessing your day-to-day emotional states over a period of 1 week. You could do this by self-assessing how you are feeling at any given moment 4 times a day at random times during the day. On the first day, you will have taken 4 samples and they might look like this. And as you can see here, you've actually had a good day. You've been pretty excited. Perhaps you're out on a ride with your beautiful horse, with your dog running along beside you, having great fun. You've also been happy and relaxed on that day, perhaps sitting down reading a really good book with your beautiful dog cuddled up beside you on the chair. On day 3 of your 7-day trial, you will have taken 12 samples of your emotional states, and your chart may now look like this. As you can see, you've got some more happy faces, happy smileys on the right-hand side of the chart, but you've also got a few unhappy, frowny faces on the left side. Perhaps you've been having some trouble at work, or one of your dogs or your horse is unwell, or you've lost a good friend. I'm sure you're all very familiar with these kinds of ups and downs of daily life. We all go through them, and on the whole, we cope pretty well. Finally, you're on day 7. This is the last day of your week's trial. Now you have 28 samples of your emotional states through the week, and your chart might look like something like this. As you can see, you've got some more sad, frowny faces on the left-hand side, but actually the right-hand side of your chart looks pretty healthy. Lots and lots of happy, smiley faces. So overall, based on this 1-week assessment of your ups and downs of your emotional life, you're doing pretty well. But what if your chart looked like this, the chart on the right-hand side? Big difference. A lot fewer smiley faces on the right-hand side of this chart, but lots of sad, frowny faces on the left-hand side. And this brings me to a really important concept, not just in human emotional well-being and mental health, but also in the emotional well-being and mental health of other animals too, and of course, dogs and horses. And this concept is mood state. Generally speaking, your mood state is represented by, or is the product of, the average of all your emotional states, good and bad, measured over a given period of time. And as you can see here, all I've done is draw a line around the data points of the 2 charts I showed you in the previous slide. The chart on the left shows someone with a pretty good and positive mood state. There are lots of happy smileys and not too many sad frownies. In contrast, the chart on the right represents someone with a poor or negative mood state. There are lots more sad, frowny faces and far fewer happy, smiley faces. In human psychology and human psychiatric medicine, it's been known for many, many years that there is a link between mood state and how optimistic or pessimistic you are as an individual. People with anxiety disorders or depression are much more pessimistic about life. In contrast, people who are generally happy about life are more optimistic about how things will turn out for them in the future. This is called having an optimistic or a pessimistic cognitive bias, and this is also linked to personality type in humans. For example, introverts and extroverts generally differ in their levels of optimism and pessimism. And in recent years, this concept of being generally optimistic or pessimistic about how life is going for you has found a hugely important application as a practical and reliable measure of animal welfare. Measuring animal welfare for farm animals, such as cattle, sheep, pigs, chicken, and all animals in zoos, has always been very difficult because reliably assessing the emotional well-being of all these different species of animals by simply watching their behavior can be very difficult. But what can be reliably and objectively tested is how optimistic or pessimistic these animals are. And in fact, these techniques have also proved to be very reliable in some invertebrate species, such as bumblebees and lobsters. And the most important thing to remember about all this is that what is being measured here is the animal's mood state. And these tools have also been shown to be remarkably effective in measuring the mood states of dogs and horses. In recent years, there has also been a great deal of interest in how the gut microbiome also influences mood states, specifically through the gut-brain axis. Every part of the body, hands, feet, face, scalp, mouth, eyes, nostril, the gut, and so on, has its own unique and specific resident population of microorganisms, each collectively called the microbiome. The gut microbiome is special for two reasons. First, it's hugely diverse and predominantly located in the colon, and second, it is intimately connected to the brain through 5 distinct communication channels. The first channel is the sympathetic nervous system. This is the system responsible for the fight or flight stress response, and this is how the brain slows down the rate of activity of the gut and digestion. This is what causes the uncomfortable tightness you feel in your gut when you are stressed. The parasympathetic nervous system works in the opposite way. It's a two-way communication channel through the vagus nerve, where the gut microbiota can signal to the brain to reduce the stress response. And at the same time, the brain can modulate appetite and gut motility. The vagus nerve is responsible for that gut feeling. The remaining 3 communication channels allow the microflora themselves to communicate the status of the gut up to the brain via the gut immune system and the gut endocrine system. And in addition to that, the microflora themselves synthesize their own neurotransmitters, which can modulate many different neural pathways in the brain. So all in all, it's a very complicated system and tightly integrated into the emotional lives of all animals. Now, before I go any further, I just need to talk about the difference between prebiotics and probiotics. Probiotics are dietary supplements of specially formulated combinations of beneficial living microorganisms, such as bacteria and yeasts. On the other hand, prebiotics are dietary supplements of specifically formulated combinations of non-living, complex, functional carbohydrates, such as the mannan oligosaccharides. And on this slide, I have summarized the 3 primary functions of prebiotics, which are supporting the populations of the gut microorganisms, shown in blue, feeding and maintaining the health of the large intestine, shown in green, and finally, supporting the local immune system of the gastrointestinal tract, shown in red. This is why prebiotics are called functional nutrients, and this is why I like to call these prebiotics rocket fuel for probiotics. And one other important point I want to make here, and that is some prebiotics are also probiotics. A very good example are some of the Saccharomyces strains of yeasts, and I've shown some examples of these yeasts on this slide here. These yeasts are functionally both the rocket and the rocket fuel, and I'll talk about some of these important yeasts and their role in the treatment of stress and anxiety in both dogs and horses a little later on. Chronic gastrointestinal disease is very common, not just in humans, but also in dogs and horses as well. These diseases are very difficult to treat and manage, and any human who suffers from inflammatory bowel disease, for example, Crohn's disease or irritable bowel syndrome, will tell you how horrible and debilitating these conditions are. What I've done here is give you a list of some of the chronic gastrointestinal diseases that can affect not just humans, but dogs too, and even horses in some cases. There is an important link between the development of these diseases and the health of the gut microbiome. And the 5 communication channels between the gut and the brain that I talked about earlier helps explain why this relationship exists, and also why prebiotics and probiotics are so helpful in managing stress and anxiety in humans, dogs, and in horses. A little later on, I will share with you some of the results of the research that has been done in this important area. So I've spent quite a lot of time so far talking about mood states. I need to come back at this point and go into more detail about emotional states themselves. Right at the beginning, I talked about the vast number of different emotional states that we humans are able to experience, ranging from extreme terror when we're being chased by a hungry tiger, to a state of relaxed, happy contentment when we're about to fall asleep, dreaming about our big win on the lottery. But what is really interesting about all of these different and colourful emotional states is that they are all underpinned by just 8 fundamental core emotional systems. And what is even more interesting is that these 8 core emotional systems evolved very early on during the course of evolution. They are present in all mammals and in birds too, and possibly even some other vertebrates such as reptiles and fish. The names that these 8 emotional systems have been given are seeking, play, care, lust, rage, fear, panic, grief, and pain. I'm not going to talk about why these emotional systems are named that way. You can find plenty of information about that on the internet. What's important here is that for us as dog lovers and horse lovers, it's really important for us to understand how these core emotional systems work, and even more importantly, how we can use them to proactively change animals' mood states and thereby improve their welfare. So what I'm going to do now is give you a brief overview of what these emotional systems do and how they work together to give the animal all its emotional experiences. And then I'll bring everything together by showing you the kinds of practical things that we can do to actually reprogram how these emotional systems are interacting with each other. This is really the key to being able to shape and change the animal's mood states, and it's a very powerful tool indeed. I find it convenient to arrange these 8 emotional systems into 2 broad groups: the basic survival emotions and then the more complex social emotions. Each of these groups is controlled by the master emotion, which is the seeking system. The seeking system drives all other emotional systems. It is the system that motivates all animals to go out into the world and to live their lives, and it motivates all animals to survive and to thrive. The evolutionary role of the 4 survival emotions, fear, pain, rage, and lust, is to give the animal the best possible chance of survival in a sometimes hostile and ever-changing world. The prime objective of all these survival systems is to ensure that the animal manages to successfully pass on its genes to the next generation. On the other hand, the 3 more complex social emotions, panic, grief, play, and care, are more recent evolutionary developments. The social emotions evolved when some animals started to live in cooperative groups with each other, which gave them additional survival advantages. And this is the origin of emotions that we humans are much more familiar with. We are a highly social species, which is why so many of us choose to adopt companion animals, like dogs and horses, into our families and into our lives. The seeking system is dedicated to monitoring all the sensory information coming in from the environment, what the dog sees, hears, smells, touches, and so on. This is exteroception. The seeking system also monitors all the sensory information coming in from the rest of the body, and particularly important here, information from the gut via the gut-brain axis. This is called interoception, and it is this so-called gut feeling that we are also familiar with. Now, importantly, all this information is not just simply passed on to other parts of the brain, which then automatically trigger some behavioral response by the animal. It's a bit more complicated than that. What the seeking system actually does is this. The seeking system sets in motion a complicated process which makes a quick comparison between all the sensory information the animal is receiving and the animal's memories of previous experiences. Notice here that I've called the seeking system the expectancy seeking system. This is because it is trying to predict what all the sensory information it is receiving actually means. Is it safe? Should I approach? Or should I avoid? What the seeking system is doing is looking for patterns in all the sensory information coming in from the environment. And the animal's mood state is critically important here. The seeking system has been shaped by evolution over millions of years to work this way. Imagine you're an animal living out there on the plains somewhere in Africa, trying to stay alive, trying not to be eaten by some hungry animal. You get injured or you're sick. The best thing for you to do is to hide yourself away and lay low so you can rest and conserve energy, and this will help you to recover more quickly. Being sick or injured over any length of time affects your mood state. That is, you become more pessimistic. You become much more cautious about trusting what you see, what you hear, what you smell. Is it safe? Should I approach or should I avoid? It's far better, in terms of your survival, to stay hidden away unless you are very sure it really is safe. If you hear a twig snap and you think it's something you can eat, but it's really a hungry lion, if you are injured and you're sick and you can't run away fast enough, you are going to die. So the animal's mood state very much shapes how the seeking system actually processes incoming sensory information from the environment. When the welfare of a dog or a horse is good, their overall mood state is good too, and they become optimistic about life, expecting good things to be on their way. Then the seeking system behaves like this. Dogs and horses will exert a great deal of time and effort into positive seeking behaviors when they're feeling good about life. The seeking system drives enthusiasm, curiosity, and a sense of purpose. The seeking system drives pleasure. The seeking system drives the dopamine-rich reinforcement pathways in areas of the brain, such as the nucleus accumbens. The seeking system is also responsible for the feelings of frustration when an expected reward is withheld or denied, and also the relief when that reward finally arrives. However, when the welfare of a dog or a horse is bad, their overall mood state is poor too, and they become much more pessimistic about life. Then the seeking system behaves like this. Sustained high levels of stress hormones eventually damage critically important areas of the brain. The seeking system's enthusiasm, curiosity, and a sense of purpose is switched off. The seeking system is now in survival mode. Assume everything is dangerous. Avoid and shut down. This is what eventually leads to depression and then learned helplessness. And this is where the other emotional systems, like fear and pain, play a critical role in an animal's survival. I'm describing the fear system and the pain system together here because they are closely linked. If you know your learning theory, you will know that the Pavlovian or classical conditioning, pain is the unconditioned stimulus, the US, for the unconditioned response, the UR, of fear. And what is really important here is that animals cannot be habituated to pain, and this is a huge welfare problem for both dogs and horses. Another problem with domestic animals like dogs and horses is that they don't live in wild and dangerous places. They live in pretty safe environments alongside us humans. But the fear system and the pain system are still very active and can easily and commonly become maladaptive. And I'll come back to this later when I talk about how we can manage emotional states and mood states in dogs and horses. Another system that can easily and commonly become maladaptive, especially in dogs, is the panic grief system. In evolutionary terms, the panic grief system ensures that vulnerable young animals don't wander off too far from their mothers, which of course makes it less likely that they will be eaten by some hungry predators. But we have bred dogs to develop strong, secure social attachments, specifically to human beings, that last a lifetime. And this explains why separation anxiety is such a huge welfare problem in dogs. I'll come back to this later when I talk about how we can manage emotional states and mood states in dogs and horses. One thing that I do need to say here about panic grief system, the panic grief system works by engaging the pain system and the fear system, which, when working together, have a devastating and long-lasting negative effect on the animal's emotional well-being and mood state. This explains why loss of a loved one is so painful. It really does hurt, and is such a powerful and negative emotional force that it will ultimately kill vulnerable animals. They basically die of loneliness. Anxiety is basically a maladaptive, sustained fear that causes a sustained release of stress hormones, cortisol and adrenaline, into the circulation. These stress hormones are circulated to the organs and tissues all over the body. And sustained exposure to these stress hormones is toxic, causing serious damage in all body systems, serious damage to the immune system, serious damage to the inflammatory system, and serious damage to the brain itself. In the final part of this presentation, I'm going to talk about some of the therapeutic options that we have available to us, either as dog and horse owners or as professionals working with dogs and horses. And as I've said many times already, in order to change and maintain the healthy emotional well-being of our companion animals, we need to change the animal's mood state from a pessimistic cognitive bias to an optimistic cognitive bias. Mood state change always must start with addressing the negative emotional states. This is absolutely critical, and what it involves is identifying, assessing, and then aggressively managing ongoing anxiety problems, ongoing pain problems, and ongoing separation problems. Remember, fear, pain, and panic grief are negative emotional states and create and maintain pessimistic mood states, which ultimately leads to chronic anxiety and depression. So it really is critically important to get the animal's anxiety, pain, and separation anxiety under control before doing anything else. So in both dogs and horses, the fear system and the pain system and the panic grief system can cause serious behavioural problems, which is a huge welfare problem. The best way to deal with this is to adopt a robust approach that includes a combination of different kinds of treatments. These typically include aggressive multimodal pain management, anti-anxiety drugs and antidepressant drugs, prebiotics and probiotics, and of course, working with behaviourists and veterinarians. What is really interesting here is that in recent years, progressive and innovative companies like Lallemand have developed a number of unique prebiotic and probiotic supplements that have been shown to be very helpful in reducing and managing anxiety. This is a study done some years ago looking for evidence that yeasts could be used as probiotics in humans for treating chronic gastrointestinal disease, such as inflammatory bowel disease. Remember, I discussed earlier the link between chronic anxiety and chronic gastroenteritis. The researchers found a number of very good studies that showed that the yeast Saccharomyces boulardii was actually really effective in helping to treat these horrible and very difficult to treat diseases. Many more studies have since confirmed that Saccharomyces yeasts are indeed very powerful probiotics. A great deal of this research has now been repeated in other animals, such as dogs and horses, by forward-thinking companies like Lallemand. And here's one example of the results of this research in dogs. What you see here is some of the evidence showing how useful both probiotics and prebiotics are in treating chronic gastrointestinal disease in dogs. Remember, I told you earlier that probiotics are the living microorganisms themselves, while the prebiotics are the complex functional carbohydrates that act as the rocket fuel for the probiotics. All animals, including humans, dogs, and horses, lose body condition when they're suffering from chronic gastrointestinal disease. The chart on the top right of the screen shows you the effect of probiotics, dark green bars on the chart, on body condition score compared to the placebo, the white bars on the chart, over 60 days. And you can see that dogs given the probiotic achieved much better body condition scores than the dogs being given the placebo. The chart on the bottom shows the results from a different study, this time using a Mannan oligosaccharide prebiotic. What the bars on the chart show is that the quality of the gut flora in the dogs treated with probiotic, the blue bars, had improved significantly compared to the dogs not given the probiotic, the grey bars on the chart. Horses are incredibly sensitive to stress. Small changes in their daily routine, such as feeding time, social isolation, the time they leave their stables to graze, being transported to shows and competitions, all affect horses' well-being. All these changes in routine stress horses, and this can lead to disruption of the animal's gut microbiome, leading to weight loss and disease. These animals often suffer from chronic diarrhea and stomach ulcers. What you see here are the results from some research looking at how probiotics might help prevent disease in horses being transported to shows and competition. The chart on the right shows a profile of the horse's gut microbiome the day before transport, D-1, the day of transport, D0, and 3 days after transport, D+3. The horses not fed probiotic, control group, are on the left of the chart, and the horses fed the probiotic are on the right of the chart. There are 3 important key findings here. 1, there was an increase in the overall diversity of the gut microflora. 2, the number of lactate-eating bacteria increased. This is important because it prevents acidosis, which is a key factor in the formation of gastric ulcers. And 3, the number of cellular lytic bacteria also increased. These organisms break down cellulose and thereby improve the prebiotic properties of the fiber in the diet. Stress also has a negative impact on growth rate, and this is particularly important in horses where growing foals are particularly sensitive to stressors. This study looked at the effects of adding a probiotic to the horse's feed, and as you can see on the graph on the right, foals being given the probiotic showed a reduced incidence of gastrointestinal disease, showed an increased growth rate with an extra weight gain of 23.4%, and finally showed an earlier establishment of their gut microbiomes. The overall positive effect on the health of these foals was because the Saccharomyces probiotic enhanced the digestibility of the prebiotic fiber in the diet. This is a study of the effects of adding the probiotic Bifidobacterium longum to the diets of a group of dogs that were particularly sensitive to stress and anxiety. Are the kinds of dogs I have been talking about that have developed a poor mood state and a negative cognitive bias. In this study, the researchers used 2 ways to measure dogs' responses. First, they observed changes in behavior, and you can see this on the chart at the top of the slide. Second, they recorded physiological changes, including salivary cortisol, heart rate, and heart rate variability. You can see this on the chart at the bottom of the slide. Heart rate variability is a really useful measure of real changes in anxiety level because it gives you an indicator of the balance in the activity between the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system, or the anti-stress side of the autonomic nervous system. Remember that the parasympathetic vagus nerve is a primary communication channel between the gut microflora and the brain. If you compare the height of the light grey bars, dogs getting probiotic, and the dark grey bars, dogs getting placebo, on these charts, you can see that the dogs getting the probiotic showed significantly less stress indicators compared to those dogs being given the placebo. I mentioned earlier that the development of stomach ulcers or gastric ulcers was a big problem, especially in show horses and competing horses. This is some data produced by the world-famous Newmarket Racing Stables in the UK. And what it shows is the frequency of gastric ulcers in racing horses being stabled and raced there. The severity of gastric ulcers are measured on a scale from 0, meaning no ulcers, to 4, which means lots of very serious and damaging ulcers on the mucosa of the horse's stomachs. And as you can see here, 1/3 of the horses at this stables developed grade 3 ulcers, which has a huge impact on the horse's welfare and also on the racing performance. So it's also a big commercial problem as well for the equine industry. These are the results of a study carried out at the UK Newmarket stables on their horses. As you can see here, feeding these anxious and stressed horses a lactobacillus probiotic had a huge positive impact on the grade of their stomach ulcers. Over a period of just a few months, the grades of their ulcers was reduced from a high grade 2 to 3 right down to a low grade 1 to 2. That's a big jump, and it had a significant beneficial effect on the welfare of these horses and on their ability to perform at their optimal levels on the racetrack. Finally, I'm going to finish up by coming back to the panic grief system and its role in separation anxiety in dogs. Remember that the function of the panic grief system is to maintain secure social attachments between individuals. The panic grief system was responsible for the close bond that you had with your parents when you were a child. The panic grief system is also responsible for the close bond that you now have with your life partner, hopefully, and your own children. It hurts when you are separated from them, even for a short period of time, but you learn to cope with this separation. And when you are reunited, you love them even more. The bond between you becomes even stronger. This is the same for dogs, and to a lesser extent for horses. I said earlier that the panic grief system is responsible for all the pain and suffering in dogs with severe separation anxiety, and this is a huge welfare problem. But the reason that the panic grief system causes so much suffering is because those dogs simply missed out on a well-designed socialization plan when they were puppies. Dogs can learn to cope with separation, but it does take effort, starting with the breeder, then carried on by the new owner. This is where our dogs have been failed so badly, especially because of the awful puppy farm trade and the mass marketing of puppies on the internet, with no regard to the welfare at all. Finally, summing up what I've been talking about here. Mood state is the forgotten but the most important factor in dog and horse welfare. Mood state is an amalgamation of a blend of the 8 core emotional systems. We can only change mood states by fixing imbalances in the 8 core emotional systems. We can fix these imbalances in several different ways, including pharmacology, such as analgesics, anxiolytics, and antidepressants, prebiotics and probiotics. The experts at Lallemand will talk more about this. And finally, the behavioral intervention in the cooperation of behaviorists and veterinarians. Thank you very much for watching, and I will now hand you back to our wonderful hosts at Lallemand.